Israel has to have the strategic depth with which to defend itself. Israel cannot possibly, at any stage withdraw from the West Bank or the Golan Heights. Sorry, if I offend anyone by calling it the West Bank, I can't pronounce Judea in some areas, so I'll stick with West Bank. It's easier for me, not being a Hebrew speaker. General Allen, the American, President Obama's military envoy in relation to the recent negotiations over peace with the Palestinians, General Allen, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, came up with a solution as to how Israel could withdraw from the West Bank and replace its presence with perhaps international forces, including American forces, and technology. Now, of course, I mean, General Allen is a very, very fine general. There's no question about that. He's a very, very good commander. But I know for sure, if he'd been asked to advise America, his own country, on how to deal with a similar problem on their borders, he would never have advocated what he's advocating here. Never. And if he had, he'd have been fired by the president. So I think it was completely unrealistic. And that's one of the big problems, is that so many members of the international community, including the US, the EU, other organizations, other countries, desperately keen to tell Israel what it must do, but they certainly would not consider taking the same action in respect to themselves. And when you just look at the rocket fire from Gaza, for example, and how Israel mustn't retaliate in the way it does and defend itself, no country in the world, no country would restrain itself when it was faced with that situation. Britain was faced with that situation back in 1943-44. We didn't just sit back and watch it. We pummeled the hell out of the Nazis who were developing rockets. We killed numerous innocent civilians in destroying the V1 program because we had no choice. And that's what we would do today as well, I'm sure. The threat to Israel from the new way of warfare. It's not really new, it's just an evolution of what we've been seeing for many, many years. And I think the biggest threat to Israel is not so much that kind of warfare, it's international pressure to force or to try and force Israel to conform to international norms on dealing with that. And while the jihadists in the Islamic State and other groups are determined to win, the West is determined to restrain itself, which means it can't win, because they're going to use all-out, unmitigated determination and violence to achieve it. We are not willing to match that with the level of military force or even diplomatic force that is required to counter it. To look at the way that Israel had fought in that conflict in the context of other nations, the way that other nations fight. Because, of course, Israel's always seen in isolation. It's very easy to rip apart an army that's fighting in isolation, that there's nothing to compare it to, just to say that it's behaving badly, whatever, there's no comparison. Whereas in Britain, we always fight with allies. The Americans always fight with allies. Other countries always fight with allies. Israel is fighting alone. The state forces adhering very strictly to the laws of armed conflict, and their opponents, whether they were in Gaza, whether they're in Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever, their opponents deliberately flaunting the laws of armed conflict, flouting the laws of armed conflict, and not only that, not only deliberately attacking civilians, the enemy's civilian population, but also deliberately trying to force their enemies to kill their own civilians as a strategic tool in order to bring international pressure to bear when they knew that they couldn't possibly beat their opponents through conventional military means. They had to find other ways of doing it, and that is to bring unbearable pressure to bear on their enemies because they were killing innocent civilians and luring them to do so. There are numerous cases in Afghanistan that I could tell you all about, and Iraq, where our enemies there did what they do in what Hamas do in Gaza and try and lure us into killing their people, force us either to make a choice between letting the enemy go or killing innocent civilians in the process. Very difficult decisions often to make. I think it's that hesitancy by the West, which is ingrained now, which restrains us and stops us from really fighting against people that need to be fought. That is the greatest blight on. I think the greatest blight on the West's ability to defend itself today, and they will continue to try and pressure Israel into conforming to the norms that they think are necessary. And I think that in exactly the same way that Israel must resist all of this pressure, and I'm sure it will resist must resist all the pressure to get out of the West Bank, get off the Golan Heights. Israel must also resist the psychological pressure and the political and diplomatic pressure to conform to Western norms of hesitancy and refusal to deploy the necessary military force to attack the enemy that it faces. Thank you very much.